My name is Mary. I'm 29 years old. 3 days ago, I inherited $18 million from my Aunt Eleanor. Yesterday, my parents tried to steal it from me by claiming she had Alzheimer's. I sat in that Portland law office watching my father Jonathan's face twist with rage as the lawyer read Eleanor's will. "Mary isn't even our real daughter," he snarled. "We took her in when no one else wanted her. Eleanor was demented. This will is invalid." My mother Patricia nodded viciously. "She manipulated a sick woman. Mary doesn't deserve a penny." They spoke about me like I was livestock, like I was still that terrified 16-year-old girl they handed over to the Morrison family for cash to pay their gambling debts. They thought I'd never found out. They thought Eleanor never knew. They were wrong on both counts. Because Eleanor had been recording every conversation in her house for 3 years. And what her security cameras captured 1 month ago would destroy my parents so completely that they'd withdraw their lawsuit within 24 hours and flee Oregon forever. Before I continue, if you find this story worth hearing, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely want to follow along. Oh, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now let me take you back. For 13 years, I believed the story they told everyone in Northeast Portland. Jonathan and Patricia Caldwell were middle-class heroes who rescued a foster kid from certain disaster. He sold insurance at Northwestern Mutual, earning a respectable $68,000 annually. She worked as an elementary school secretary at Alameda Elementary, managing attendance records and helping struggling families navigate the system. We lived in a modest 4-bedroom house at 2847 Maple Street, painted yellow with white trim, featuring a front porch where Patricia grew prize-winning roses. The neighbors brought casseroles when I had the flu. Mrs. Chen next door borrowed sugar for her baking. Mr. Rodriguez across the street helped Jonathan fix our fence every spring. Everyone knew each other's business, and our business was solid, respectable, unremarkable. The narrative was simple and compelling. I was the lucky one who'd been chosen. "We saved you from the foster system, Mary," Patricia would say whenever I questioned anything about my past or asked uncomfortable questions about family finances. "You owe us everything. Do you know what happens to kids who age out without families? We gave you stability, education, a future. Some gratitude would be appropriate." I accepted this narrative without question until last month, when I was helping them clean out their garage before a renovation. Hidden behind dusty Christmas decorations and boxes of Jonathan's old insurance files, I found a manila folder with my name written in Patricia's careful handwriting. Inside were financial documents, bank transfer receipts, and correspondence that made no sense if I was their adopted daughter. These weren't adoption fees or legal costs. These were transaction records, payment confirmations, terms and conditions for services rendered. Something that made me realize the Caldwells weren't the heroes of my story. They were dealers, and I had been their merchandise. The documents painted a picture I'd never imagined. The summer I turned 16, I hadn't been helping out the Morrison family during Mrs. Morrison's recovery from surgery. I'd been sold to them under a carefully crafted arrangement that lasted exactly 93 days. The email fragment was still in the folder, printed and filed with meticulous care. Payment confirmed, $13,000. Terms agreed per our discussion. Pickup Monday, 6 p.m., usual location. Return arrangement activated if placement proves unsatisfactory for any reason. The reply email, sent from Jonathan's account. Understood. Mary has been prepared for extended stay. No contact with birth family during placement period. She's been told this is temporary volunteer work. Discretion appreciated as always. I remembered that summer with devastating clarity now. The Morrison estate at 12,600 Northwest Thurman Street, with its circular driveway and electronic gates, the way Morrison inspected my appearance each morning, adjusting my posture and criticizing my clothing choices. How she made me wear different outfits when their business associates visited, always something more revealing than I was comfortable with. I remembered the strange men who came for dinner parties and seemed more interested in asking me personal questions than discussing business with Mr. Morrison. The way they looked at me, the uncomfortable comments about my potential and my future, the suggestions about opportunities that could open up for a girl like me if I was flexible and understanding. I'd been returned to the Caldwells on a Thursday evening in late August because Mrs. Morrison declared me too willful for our purposes. She'd complained that I asked too many questions, set too many boundaries, and showed insufficient appreciation for the opportunities they were providing. Jonathan picked me up with $2,300 more in his pocket than when he'd dropped me off. I learned this because one of the documents in the folder was his handwritten calculation. $13,000 initial payment minus $10,700 return fee equals $2,300 net profit. Acceptable for trial run. What I didn't understand then, but became horrifyingly clear now, was that this wasn't a one-time experiment. It was a proof of concept for something much larger. Eleanor Whitfield had always been portrayed as the problematic relative in Patricia's family narrative. She lived alone in a Victorian mansion, worked in technology nobody understood, never married, never had children, never fit into conventional expectations. Patricia described her as bitter about her life choices and eccentric to the point of mental instability. We were explicitly forbidden from visiting Eleanor or maintaining any relationship with her. Patricia explained this restriction as protecting me from Eleanor's negative influence and inappropriate ideas about family loyalty. Jonathan supported this position, claiming Eleanor had always resented their rescue of me and wanted to undermine my gratitude toward them. But Eleanor found ways around their prohibition that showed remarkable persistence and creativity. Every Tuesday at 2 p.m. during my nursing school years, I would meet her during study breaks at Powell's Books, specifically in the small Pearl Room on the second floor where we could talk privately. She'd arrive with coffee and pastries, asking detailed questions about my classes, my clinical rotations, my future plans. More importantly, she'd slip me envelopes containing cash for textbooks, clinical supplies, stethoscopes, anything I needed that the Caldwells claimed they couldn't afford. These payments always came with careful instructions. Don't mention this to your parents. They wouldn't understand my investment in your education. The text message I received 3 days before her death still sends chills through me. Your medical school fund is growing steadily, $847,000 and counting. They have no idea what you're truly capable of achieving. Keep protecting those children. E. I thought she meant my nursing career and my work with pediatric patients. I had no idea she was preparing me for a war I didn't know was coming. Eleanor's final message to me mentioned something cryptic about an insurance policy that would ensure I was protected forever, regardless of what happened to her. At the time, I assumed she meant life insurance or some kind of trust fund arrangement. I never imagined she meant evidence that would destroy the people who called themselves my parents. My decision to become a pediatric nurse wasn't random or purely altruistic. Working in Oregon Health and Science University's Children's Ward 3B, I'd developed an almost supernatural ability to recognize signs of abuse, neglect, and exploitation that other staff members missed. The way certain children flinched when adults approached too quickly, the inconsistent stories they told about home life, the fear in young eyes that spoke of experiences they couldn't or wouldn't articulate, the way some kids seemed older than their years, hypervigilant, constantly scanning for threats or opportunities to please adults who might hurt them. 3 months ago, I'd reported suspicious bruises on an 8-year-old patient named Jessica who'd been admitted for severe dehydration. Her guardian, a woman who claimed to be a distant relative, provided inconsistent information about Jessica's medical history and seemed more concerned about legal liability than the child's welfare. My report triggered a comprehensive investigation that revealed a sophisticated trafficking ring operating through a family placement service. Jessica and 4 other children had been moved through a network of temporary guardians who collected fees for providing access to vulnerable minors. The operation, had been running for 7 years before my observation brought it down. Watching Jessica's transformation from terrified victim to protected child triggered something in me I couldn't name at the time. A sense of recognition. A feeling that I understood her fear because I'd lived it myself, even if I couldn't remember exactly how. Now I understand what Eleanor had been preparing me for. Every shift in the pediatric ward, every case where I'd identified abuse, every time I'd stood between a vulnerable child and the adults who wanted to exploit them, it had all been training for this moment. Benjamin Crawford's call came on a Friday afternoon while I was adjusting IV lines for twin 6-year-olds recovering from pneumonia. His voice was measured, professional, but underneath I detected something that sounded almost like anticipation. "Miss Caldwell, I need you to come to my office immediately. Your aunt has left you some things that require immediate attention." As I hung up the phone and arranged coverage for the remainder of my shift, I noticed my hands weren't shaking. They should have been. Eleanor's death should have devastated me. Instead, I felt something else building in my chest. Something that felt like preparation, like purpose. Like I'd been training for this conversation my entire adult life. Crawford and Associates occupied the entire 45th floor of the U.S. Bancorp Tower, their floor-to-ceiling windows offering an unobstructed view of Mount Hood that probably cost more per square foot than most people's annual rent. Benjamin Crawford's corner office reflected old-money discretion, mahogany panels, leather-bound legal volumes, and Persian rugs that looked like museum pieces. Benjamin himself was exactly what I'd expected from Eleanor's careful descriptions. Mid-50s, silver hair perfectly styled, steel gray suit that whispered expensive tailoring rather than shouting it. His handshake was firm but brief, his manner professionally warm without crossing into familiarity. "Thank you for coming so quickly, Miss Caldwell. Please have a seat. We're waiting for your parents to arrive." Jonathan and Patricia arrived exactly 12 minutes late, which was typical for them. Patricia wore her best church dress, the navy blue one she reserved for funerals and parent-teacher conferences, paired with pearls that had belonged to her own mother. Jonathan had clearly come straight from work, his Northwestern Mutual tie slightly askew and his briefcase showing wear from daily use. "Sorry we're late," Patricia said breathlessly. "The traffic from Alameda Elementary was worse than expected. I had to arrange substitute coverage on short notice." Jonathan kept checking his BlackBerry and muttering under his breath about missing appointments and losing potential commission on a policy renewal. Their agitation seemed disproportionate to the situation, but I attributed it to grief and the unfamiliarity of legal proceedings. We settled into Conference Room 12B, a space designed for serious business, mahogany table that could seat 8, matching chairs upholstered in burgundy leather, and a view of the Willamette River that would have been calming under different circumstances. Patricia and Jonathan sat across from me like we were negotiating a hostage exchange rather than attending a will reading. Benjamin's file folder was unusually thick for someone who'd lived as modestly as Eleanor. As he opened it, I caught glimpses of stock certificates, property deeds, bank statements, and what appeared to be surveillance photographs. Something about the organization suggested this meeting had been carefully choreographed. "Your aunt was a remarkable woman," Benjamin began, his tone suggesting this was an understatement. "Before we begin the formal reading, I should mention that she gave me very specific instructions about this meeting." He looked directly at me with an expression I couldn't decode. She was particularly concerned about ensuring everyone understood the completeness and validity of her mental faculties at the time this will was executed. "Eleanor Whitfield lived modestly by choice," Benjamin announced, "but she accumulated considerable wealth through strategic investments and business ventures that most people, including her family, knew nothing about." He started with the real estate holdings. The Victorian Mansion at 3247 Northwest Hoyt Street, professionally appraised at $3.2 million, including furnishings, artwork, and a climate-controlled wine collection worth $47,000. Then came investment portfolios that made my head spin. Tesla stock acquired when the company was struggling, now worth $12.3 million. Amazon shares purchased in 1998, valued at $2.8 million. Real estate holdings in Seattle, San Francisco, and Austin, totaling $4.1 million. But the primary source of Mrs. Whitfield's wealth, Benjamin continued, was the sale of her technology company, Safeguard Technologies, to a major corporation in 2019. After taxes and legal fees, this transaction netted $5.7 million. He let these numbers sink in before delivering the knockout punch. The total estimated estate value is $18.2 million. Per the terms of Eleanor Whitfield's last will and testament, executed on September 15, 2024, and witnessed by myself and 2 colleagues, the entirety of this estate passes to Mary Eleanor Caldwell. The silence that followed was deafening. Jonathan stood so abruptly his chair scraped against the marble floor with a sound like fingernails on glass. His face had gone from confused to red to a shade of purple I'd never seen before. "There must be some mistake," he said, his voice cracking with disbelief. Eleanor had dementia. Everyone in the neighborhood knew it. She was confused, repetitive. Sometimes she didn't recognize people. She wasn't competent to make these kinds of decisions. Patricia's voice rose to a near shriek that echoed off the conference room's high ceiling. "Mary isn't even real family. We took her in out of charity when she was 16 years old. Can't possibly be legal." Their performance was Oscar-worthy. If I hadn't found those documents in their garage, I might have believed their shock was genuine. But there was something about the speed and specificity of their objections that felt rehearsed. Benjamin consulted his notes with the precision of a surgeon reviewing a procedure checklist. I anticipated these concerns might arise, which is why Mrs. Whitfield underwent comprehensive neurological testing 3 weeks before her death. What followed was the kind of public breakdown that would have horrified the Caldwells under normal circumstances. These were people who'd built their entire identity around appearances, who crafted their public image like a carefully managed marketing campaign. "She had dementia!" Patricia screamed, her voice carrying through the law office's corridors. "Everyone in our neighborhood knew it. She was confused, paranoid, talking to herself constantly. She thought people were watching her, recording her conversations. Mary took advantage of a sick woman's delusions." Jonathan began pacing behind his chair like a caged animal, his briefcase clutched in white-knuckled hands. "We've been taking care of Eleanor for years. Mary barely visited her except when she wanted something. This is classic elder abuse, and we're going to prove it." Their accusations came in rapid-fire succession. I was a manipulative opportunist. Eleanor was mentally incompetent. The will was the result of undue influence. They would contest everything in court and expose my predatory behavior. If I hadn't known what I knew about their own predatory behavior, their performance might have been convincing. They painted a picture of a vulnerable, elderly woman manipulated by a calculating caregiver, supported by detailed anecdotes about Eleanor's supposed confusion and my suspicious behavior. But Benjamin remained unnaturally calm throughout their tirade, consulting his notes and occasionally making small marks on a legal pad. When they finally exhausted themselves, he spoke with the measured tone of someone delivering a prepared statement. Dr. Sarah Mitchell at Oregon Neurology Associates administered the Montreal Cognitive Assessment to Mrs. Whitfield on September 28, 2024. Mrs. Whitfield scored 29 out of 30 possible points. Her mental capacity was not only intact, but exceptional for someone her age. He slid copies of the neurological evaluation across the table. Dr. Mitchell's notes specifically state that Mrs. Whitfield demonstrated superior memory, clear reasoning, and complete understanding of complex financial and legal concepts. The silence that followed was profound. Patricia's face had gone from red to pale to a grayish color that made me wonder if she might faint. Jonathan stopped pacing and stood frozen behind his chair, staring at the medical documents like they contained his death sentence. "And there's one more thing Eleanor wanted Mary to know," Benjamin continued, reaching for a sealed envelope that had been lying beside his legal pad throughout the meeting. Benjamin handed me the envelope with Eleanor's distinctive handwriting. For Mary, when they try to take what's yours. The paper felt expensive, substantial, like everything else in Eleanor's carefully planned life. Inside was an antique brass key and a handwritten note that would change everything. Check my home security system. You'll find everything you need to know about who your real family is and what your fake family has been doing. Password: Pediatric 1, set floor. I looked up to find both Jonathan and Patricia staring at the key with expressions I'd never seen on their faces before. Not confusion about Eleanor's mental state, not grief over lost inheritance, not even anger about the will. Fear. Pure, undiluted fear. What security system? I asked, though something in their reaction told me this wasn't new information to them. Benjamin's slight smile suggested this moment had been carefully choreographed. Mrs. Whitfield installed a comprehensive smart home system throughout her house in January 2021. Motion sensors in every room, high-definition audio recording capabilities, cloud backup storage. She was very concerned about protecting herself and documenting certain interactions. Jonathan's voice came out as a strangled croak. She recorded conversations? Everything, Benjamin replied with obvious satisfaction. 24 hours a day for the past 3 years and 2 months. Audio, video, time-stamped, GPS verified. It's all completely legal under Oregon's single-party consent statute. I watched my parents' faces cycle through disbelief, panic, calculation, and something that looked suspiciously like resignation. They weren't reacting like innocent people who'd just learned their relative had been paranoid about security. They were reacting like criminals who'd just discovered they'd been caught on camera. Of course, Mrs. Whitfield's recordings are private property, Benjamin continued, and Mary will inherit full access to all security footage along with the house itself. She'll be able to review everything at her discretion. The meeting ended with papers to sign, account numbers to verify, and promises to begin transferring funds within 48 business hours. But as we prepared to leave, I noticed Jonathan and Patricia huddled together, whispering furiously in voices too low for me to hear. They weren't acting like grieving relatives who'd just lost an inheritance they'd expected to receive. They were acting like conspirators whose secret plans had just been exposed. As the elevator descended from the 45th floor, I clutched Eleanor's key and wondered what exactly I would find when I entered her house. But judging from my parents' reaction, I suspected it would be something they'd spent years hoping I would never discover. The process server found me exactly 3 days later, arriving at OHSU during my busiest shift. I was in the middle of adjusting an IV drip for 7-year-old Marcus, who was recovering from pneumonia, when security buzzed the pediatric ward with an unusual request. "We have a gentleman here who says he needs to serve legal papers to Mary Caldwell, says it's urgent." I finished checking Marcus's breathing before heading to the nurse's station, where a nervous-looking man in an ill-fitting suit waited with a manila envelope and an apologetic expression. "Mary Eleanor Caldwell, you've been served with legal papers. Sorry about this, ma'am. Just doing my job." The lawsuit documents were more comprehensive and aggressive than I'd expected. Jonathan and Patricia had hired Goldstein and Partners, one of Portland's most expensive probate litigation firms, known for handling high-stakes inheritance disputes for wealthy families. The retainer alone was $50,000, money I knew they didn't have unless they'd liquidated their retirement savings. Case CV-2024-0923 in Multnomah County Circuit Court painted me as a master manipulator. Undue influence by non-blood relative over mentally incompetent decedent, resulting in fraudulent will execution and estate theft. The language was precise, devastating, and clearly crafted by attorneys who specialized in character assassination. But what struck me most was the timeline. The lawsuit had been filed within 72 hours of the will reading, complete with detailed medical allegations, witness statements, and financial analysis. Most people need weeks to process grief and hire attorneys. The Caldwells had been planning this legal assault before Eleanor's body was cold. The allegations were designed to destroy my reputation comprehensively. I had isolated Eleanor from her family, convinced her that her relatives were stealing from her, manipulated her medications to create confusion, and systematically worked to change her will in my favor. Supporting documentation included sworn statements from neighbors about Eleanor's supposed mental decline and my suspicious behavior. Reading these accusations felt like watching someone construct an alternate reality where I was the predator and Eleanor was the victim. The irony would have been amusing if it weren't so calculated and destructive. The Whisper campaign began immediately and moved through Portland's social networks with the efficiency of a coordinated political operation. Jonathan and Patricia had clearly spent years building relationships and credibility that they were now weaponizing against me. The first call came from Mrs. Henderson, a family friend who'd known me since childhood. "Mary, dear, I'm hearing some very concerning things about you and Eleanor's will. People are saying you manipulated a confused woman who trusted you. This doesn't sound like the girl I've watched grow up, but the stories are quite detailed." Mrs. Henderson's call was followed by similar conversations from other family friends, neighbors, and even some of Eleanor's acquaintances. The script was remarkably consistent across all these interactions. Eleanor had been showing signs of dementia for months, talking to herself, forgetting conversations, repeating stories about being watched or followed. I had taken advantage of her confusion to isolate her from family and change her will. The Caldwells targeted specific communities systematically. The Portland Garden Club, where Eleanor had been a member for 15 years, received detailed accounts of her supposed mental decline. The Laurelhurst Neighborhood Association heard about my predatory behavior toward a vulnerable, elderly woman. Eleanor's book club at Powell's was told about my systematic manipulation of their friends' generous nature. Even the baristas at Eleanor's favorite coffee shop, Stumptown on Division, were treated to concerned conversations about how that niece had taken advantage of a woman who'd always been so sharp and independent. What amazed me was how quickly people believed these stories. The narrative fit perfectly with popular perceptions about family dynamics, inheritance disputes, and who deserved what from whom. It was easier to believe that a young woman had manipulated an elderly aunt than to question the motives of seemingly respectable parents. But I noticed something disturbing about the consistency of details across multiple sources. Every person who called to express concern mentioned the same specific examples. Eleanor talking to empty rooms, forgetting recent conversations, becoming paranoid about being recorded, repeating stories about family betrayal. The script was too perfect, too coordinated to be organic community gossip. Someone had been planning this character assassination for months, possibly years. This wasn't a reaction to the will reading. It was a premeditated campaign that had been waiting for the right moment to launch. The attack on my professional reputation came with surgical precision. Dr. Martinez, my unit supervisor for 3 years, called me into risk management's office on the third-floor administrative wing for what she described as a routine discussion about recent events. The meeting room was sterile and unwelcoming, fluorescent lighting, beige walls, a conference table that looked like it had been designed for unpleasant conversations. Dr. Martinez was accompanied by Janet Walsh from Human Resources and Dr. Kevin Park from Hospital Administration, which immediately told me this wasn't routine. "Mary, we've received several concerning phone calls about your recent inheritance and your relationship with the deceased," Dr. Martinez began, consulting notes that suggested these calls had been detailed and numerous. "Questions have been raised about whether there were any ethical improprieties in your interactions with this elderly relative." The allegations were professionally devastating. Had I used my medical knowledge to manipulate an elderly woman's medications? Had I exploited my position as a healthcare provider to gain undue influence over a vulnerable person? Did my inheritance create conflicts of interest in my current role treating pediatric patients? We're not making direct accusations, Dr. Martinez emphasized, though the very fact of this meeting was accusatory. But we need to ensure there's no conflict of interest or appearance of impropriety that might affect your work with vulnerable patients. The implication was crystal clear. If I could manipulate an elderly woman with dementia, how could the hospital trust me with pediatric patients who were equally vulnerable? My 6 years at OHSU, my spotless performance record, employee ID NH4829, my reputation for identifying abuse cases, none of it mattered if the hospital administration believed I was capable of exploitation. We're placing you on administrative leave pending completion of our internal review, Dr. Martinez announced. This isn't disciplinary action, just a precautionary measure while we investigate the allegations. As I cleaned out my locker and collected my personal items from the pediatric ward, I realized how thoroughly the Caldwells had planned this assault. They weren't just trying to steal Eleanor's inheritance, they were systematically destroying my ability to earn a living, my professional reputation, and my credibility as a witness to whatever they were trying to hide. But leaving the hospital, I found an envelope tucked under my windshield wiper with Eleanor's handwriting. When they come for your work, remember why you chose to protect children. The answer is in my house. I waited until I was safely home in my one-bedroom apartment before opening Eleanor's letter. The contents made me sit down hard on my kitchen floor and question everything I thought I understood about my life. Mary, if you're reading this, it means they've started the war I've been preparing for since 2011. Your parents aren't who you think they are. Neither am I. Neither are you. Your nursing career wasn't a coincidence. Your instinct to protect children isn't natural altruism. Your ability to recognize abuse patterns isn't just professional training. You've been preparing for this fight your entire adult life, because I've been guiding you toward it. Check my home security system. Password, Pediatric 1 St. Floor. Start with the recordings from the last 3 years, then work backward if you have the stomach for it. Pay special attention to every third Thursday of every month. That's when they visited to discuss business. You'll find files marked Project Protection on the computer in my study. Everything you need is there. Financial records, private investigation reports, audio recordings, photographic evidence. Benjamin has copies of everything, but you need to see the originals to understand the scope of what we're dealing with. The inheritance isn't just money, Mary. It's ammunition. It's evidence. It's justice that's been 13 years in the making. You've spent your career protecting children who couldn't protect themselves. Now it's time to protect yourself and all the other children they've hurt over the years. Trust Benjamin completely. He's been helping me document everything since 2018. Don't trust anyone else until you've reviewed the security footage and understand exactly what you're up against. With love and respect for the warrior you've become, Aunt P.S. Your real last name isn't Caldwell. When you're ready for that truth, the documents are in my safe. The combination is your biological mother's birthday, April 15th, 72. I read Eleanor's letter 4 times before the implications fully registered. She hadn't just been collecting evidence about my past, she'd been orchestrating my entire career path to prepare me for a specific confrontation. The next morning, I called Benjamin Crawford from my apartment phone, not trusting my cell service after everything Eleanor had revealed about surveillance and preparation. I was wondering when you'd call, Benjamin said, his tone suggesting this conversation had been anticipated for years rather than days. Eleanor said you'd need at least one night to process the letter before you were ready to see what she'd discovered. How long have you known? I asked. About your parents? About the network? About what really happened when you were 16? Benjamin paused. Eleanor hired me to start investigating in 2018. We've been building the federal case for 6 years. As I drove toward Eleanor's Victorian mansion on Northwest Hoyt Street, I noticed a black sedan following me at a careful distance, maintaining exactly 3 car lengths behind me through 4 different turns. When I pulled into Eleanor's driveway, the sedan parked across the street behind a neighbor's hedge and waited. Someone was watching. Someone who knew I was about to discover something they desperately wanted to keep hidden. Someone who was about to learn that Eleanor's 13-year preparation had been even more comprehensive than they'd realized. Eleanor's Victorian mansion felt like entering a museum dedicated to secrets. Every room was precisely maintained, every surface dust-free, every detail suggesting someone who'd lived with purpose rather than merely existing day to day. But the house also felt like it had been waiting for this moment, prepared for my arrival with almost supernatural precision. Benjamin met me at the ornate front door alongside David Chen, a cybersecurity specialist who looked like he'd been pulled directly from a tech conference in Silicon Valley. David carried a metal briefcase full of equipment that suggested Eleanor's security system was considerably more sophisticated than a typical home installation. "Your aunt was more technically savvy than most people realized," David explained as we entered Eleanor's study. "This isn't off-the-shelf consumer equipment. Military-grade encryption, multiple redundant backup systems, cloud storage with international servers. This setup would make government agencies jealous." The computer system dominated an entire corner of Eleanor's study like mission control for a space program. 6 monitors arranged in a semicircle, each displaying different feeds and data streams. Backup drives stacked in climate-controlled cabinets. A server rack that hummed quietly with enough processing power to run a small corporation. David logged into the main system using Eleanor's password, which triggered a cascade of screens showing file directories organized with obsessive precision. Every location in the house had its own folder: kitchen, living room, front door, study, basement, guest rooms. Each folder contained subcategories by date, time, and activity level. Total storage capacity, 12 terabytes. Relevant footage identified by Eleanor's AI filtering system, 2,847 hours. Audio files marked as priority, 156 separate recordings. Network IP address for remote access, 192.168.1. 15. Secured with military-grade encryption. I watched the screen display years of Eleanor's life reduced to data streams and file timestamps. But this wasn't the random collection of a paranoid person, it was the methodical documentation of someone building a legal case with the precision of a federal prosecutor. "What was she looking for specifically?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Benjamin opened a folder marked Monthly Visitors, Business Meetings, Unknown Purpose. The contents displayed on the main monitor made my blood freeze in recognition and horror. The footage was organized like evidence in a criminal investigation, which I realized it essentially was. Every third Thursday of every month for the past 3 years, Jonathan and Patricia visited Eleanor at precisely 2:30 p.m., staying between 45 minutes and 90 minutes, and leaving with expressions of satisfaction that looked distinctly inappropriate for family visits. 16 documented visits total, each one recorded from multiple angles: front door security camera, living room hidden cameras, study microphones, even backup audio from Eleanor's personal recording device. The video quality was remarkably clear, the audio professionally synchronized. David queued up the audio from the most recent visit, dated 3 weeks before Eleanor's death. Eleanor had apparently upgraded her recording equipment because every word was crystal clear, every pause and inflection preserved with courtroom-quality fidelity. Jonathan's voice, unmistakable and matter-of-fact. The Morrison situation worked out better than we'd originally expected. They're very satisfied with the quality of service and interested in expanding the arrangement significantly. Patricia's response, equally casual. "How many additional placements are they requesting this time?" 6 initially, with potential for more if the results meet expectations. Premium rate structure this time, $22,000 per placement. They specifically requested clean backgrounds, no family connections that might cause complications, ages 16 to 19 preferred. My hands began shaking as the implications registered. They weren't discussing business contracts for legitimate services. They weren't talking about real estate investments or insurance policies. They were discussing the sale of human beings. They were talking about selling children the same way they'd sold me 13 years ago. Benjamin produced a series of thick folders containing financial documentation that painted a picture of systematic criminal enterprise spanning more than a decade. The paper trail was meticulous, organized chronologically, and cross-referenced with Eleanor's surveillance footage. Eleanor hired private detective Rebecca Stone 3 months after you moved out for college, Benjamin explained, spreading bank statements and receipts across Eleanor's dining room table. License number PI20190834. Total investigation costs $23,500 over 13 years of continuous surveillance and research. Detective Stone's reports revealed an operation that made my stomach turn with its scope and sophistication. Jonathan and Patricia Caldwell had developed a network that identified vulnerable teenagers aging out of the foster care system, offered them temporary housing and support, then brokered long-term placements with wealthy families who paid substantial fees for services that went far beyond legitimate childcare or household assistance. Foster placement manipulation, Benjamin explained, his lawyer's training evident in his precise language. They identify kids with no family connections, no advocates, no one who would notice if they disappeared into private arrangements. They offer temporary housing as a bridge to independence, then gradually introduce longer-term opportunities that sound legitimate but aren't. The financial records showed payments from 17 different client families over the past decade, ranging from my original $13,000 to recent placements commanding $25,000 or more. The Morrison family had been just one client in a much larger network of people willing to pay premium rates for access to vulnerable young people. The business model was horrifyingly elegant. Find isolated teenagers with no support systems, gain their trust through temporary assistance, then introduce opportunities that gradually escalated into situations the victims couldn't escape from without losing their housing, support, and future prospects. I wasn't their first victim. I was their proof of concept, their market research, their prototype for something much larger. Detective Stone's surveillance photographs revealed meetings I'd never known about, business relationships that explained how the Caldwells had sustained this operation for more than a decade. Jonathan and Patricia regularly visited a downtown Portland office building that housed something called Youth Services Consulting, LLC. The business registration documents were buried in Benjamin's files. Incorporated in 2011, registered agent Jonathan Caldwell, business address matching the downtown office building. The company's stated purpose was family placement consulting and temporary guardianship services for at-risk youth. On paper, they're legitimate placement specialists helping families navigate temporary guardianship arrangements, Benjamin explained. In reality, they're a front operation that provides legal cover for what amounts to human trafficking through private family arrangements. The client list was more extensive than I'd imagined. 12 active families across Oregon and Washington, all wealthy, all requiring discretion, all willing to pay substantial fees for access to teenagers who met specific criteria: attractive, intelligent, compliant, with no family connections who might ask inconvenient questions. Detective Stone's financial analysis revealed the true scope of their operation. Beyond direct placement fees, the Caldwells collected monthly supervision payments, housing fees, and educational support charges that turned each placement into a continuing revenue stream. But the most shocking discovery was Detective Stone's final report, dated 1 week before Eleanor's death. Subjects discussing expansion into interstate operations. Overhead references to connections in California and Nevada. Potential federal jurisdiction implications. Recommend immediate law enforcement consultation. Eleanor had been building a federal case that would destroy not just the Caldwells, but an entire network of people who bought and sold vulnerable children like commodity transactions. The USB drive I found in Eleanor's desk drawer was labeled Federal Evidence Package, Complete Documentation. The contents would change everything. The USB drive contained 27 audio files organized chronologically, each one timestamped and location verified with GPS coordinates. The first file was labeled Original Transaction Documentation, July 15, 2011, 11:43 p.m., Hilton, downtown Portland, room 237. I inserted the drive into Eleanor's computer system with hands that refused to stay steady. The audio quality was remarkable for something recorded 13 years ago, suggesting Eleanor had been using professional surveillance equipment longer than anyone realized. Every word was clear, every speaker identifiable, every pause and inflection preserved with legal quality precision. Jonathan's voice, younger, but unmistakably his. Mary's placement with the Morrisons is working out exactly as we'd hoped. She's intelligent, attractive, compliant when properly motivated. Most importantly, she has no family connections who might interfere if arrangements become more permanent. Then, Patricia's laugh was sharp and calculating. These people pay premium rates for what they call clean kids. No criminal background, no drug history, no family members who ask questions. Mary represents exactly the kind of quality they're looking for. A third voice I didn't recognize, older and refined. How many more like her can you supply on a consistent basis? As many as the market will bear, Jonathan replied without hesitation. The foster system is completely overwhelmed. Social workers carry impossible caseloads. As long as we provide proper documentation and maintain professional appearances, no one investigates private family arrangements. The conversation continued for 47 minutes, covering logistics, pricing structures, client vetting procedures, and expansion plans that made me realize I'd been witnessing the birth of a criminal enterprise that had grown far beyond my worst imaginations. But the next file on the USB drive revealed something that made the original transaction look small by comparison. The recordings from 2011 through 2024 documented the systematic evolution of what started as a single transaction into a sophisticated network that had processed dozens of vulnerable teenagers through arrangements that ranged from exploitative labor to situations I couldn't bear to think about in detail. Patricia's voice from a 2018 recording. Client satisfaction is everything in this business. Word of mouth drives our reputation in these circles. We only work with families who understand the importance of discretion and truly appreciate the quality of young people we provide. Jonathan's response. The key is managing expectations properly. The families know they're paying premium rates for premium service. The kids understand they're receiving opportunities they would never access otherwise. Everyone benefits when the arrangements are structured correctly. The euphemisms were carefully crafted, but the meaning was brutally clear. They weren't finding homes for children who needed families. They were supplying young people to wealthy clients whose needs went far beyond legitimate childcare, household assistance, or educational support. The financial documentation revealed payments that had escalated dramatically over the years. $13,000 for my placement in 2011, $18,500 for the next child, $22,000 for what they called premium placement rates, and recent transactions commanding $25,000 or more for teenagers who met specific criteria that made my skin crawl. Client feedback drives our placement strategy, Patricia explained in a 2020 recording. Some families prefer younger placements, others want more mature teenagers. Some prioritize appearance, others focus on intelligence or specific skills. We've learned to match supply with demand very precisely. Current operation records showed 6 active placements across Oregon, Washington, and Northern California. 6 teenagers living in situations that I could only pray were better than what I was imagining based on these recordings. The evidence files revealed that Eleanor had been conducting a 13-year investigation with the methodical precision of a federal prosecutor building a racketeering case. Every document was organized, every recording transcribed, every financial transaction cross-referenced with surveillance footage and witness statements. Detective Stone's reports spanned 347 pages of surveillance notes, financial analysis, and background investigations on client families. Audio recordings totaled 156 separate files, each one verified and authenticated for potential court proceedings. Bank records, surveillance photographs, witness statements, and correspondence. Eleanor had assembled a federal case that would destroy not just my parents, but an entire network of people who treated children like commodity transactions. Project Protection wasn't just about exposing the Caldwells. Eleanor had spent 13 years mapping an entire ecosystem of exploitation that included placement agencies, client families, financial facilitators, and legal advisors who helped wealthy people acquire access to vulnerable teenagers. But the most remarkable discovery was Eleanor's personal journal, written in her precise handwriting and hidden in a safe behind her bedroom bookshelf. Mary escaped because she fought back. The Morrison placement failed because she refused to accept their treatment as normal. Her instinct to resist became her strength. She chose pediatric nursing because she recognizes trauma in children. She's been unconsciously preparing for this confrontation her entire adult life. Eleanor hadn't just been collecting evidence about my situation. She'd been studying my psychological development, understanding how trauma had shaped my career choices, and preparing me to become the weapon that would destroy the people who'd victimized me. The safe also contained documents that would change everything I thought I knew about my identity and family history. Eleanor's final recording was made in her bedroom at 3:47 a.m. on October 1st, 2024, just hours before her death. Her voice was weak but absolutely determined, and the timestamp indicated she'd been awake all night preparing this message. Mary, if you're hearing this recording, it means the Caldwells have attempted to contest my will exactly as I predicted they would. Good. I've been counting on their greed to trigger the next phase of our plan. Everything in this house is evidence that will send them to federal prison for the rest of their lives. The recordings, the financial documents, Detective Stone's investigation reports, the client family background files, it's all been organized for immediate transfer to federal law enforcement. Benjamin has instructions to contact FBI agent Lisa Park at the Human Trafficking Unit the moment they file their lawsuit. The federal case is already prepared, complete with witness statements from other survivors we've located over the years. Your parents think I had Alzheimer's because I spent 3 years pretending to be mentally incompetent during their monthly visits. Every confused question, every repeated story, every moment they thought I was losing my mind. I was performing while recording every word of their business discussions. They told me about expansion plans into California and Nevada. They described client families who pay even higher rates for specific services. They discussed methods for identifying and recruiting new targets. They gave me a complete blueprint of their criminal network, while thinking I was too confused to understand what they were saying. They're planning to disappear after the probate case concludes, regardless of the outcome. 6 children are in immediate danger. The evidence package is prepared for federal prosecution, but I need you to make the final decision about whether to proceed. You're not Mary Caldwell. Your real name is Mary Catherine Morrison. Your biological parents, Catherine and Michael Morrison, died in a car accident when you were 3 years old. You were placed with the Morrison family who purchased you because they were distant relatives attempting to claim inheritance money from your parents' estate. When the inheritance claim failed, they returned you to the Caldwells, who had been facilitating the arrangement. You've been living under a false identity with people who sold you like property, all while building a career dedicated to protecting children from exactly the kind of people who victimized you. The documents in my safe will prove your real identity and your inheritance rights from your biological parents' estate. But more importantly, you're not their victim anymore. You're their judge, their jury, and their justice. The choice is yours, my dear girl. But remember, you survived their attempt to destroy you, and you've spent 13 years becoming exactly the person who can destroy them. The recording ended with the sound of Eleanor's labored breathing and medical equipment beeping steadily in the background. She'd literally used her final hours to prepare evidence that would protect me and destroy the people who'd sold me. I sat in Eleanor's study until dawn, absorbing the truth of what I'd learned and the magnitude of what Eleanor had prepared me to do. The woman I'd known as my aunt had been fighting a war I didn't know existed. The people I'd called parents had been criminals who thought their victim was too grateful and too isolated to ever threaten them. And I had been unconsciously preparing for this confrontation. Through every shift I'd worked protecting abused children, every case where I'd identified exploitation, every moment I'd stood between a vulnerable child and the adults who wanted to hurt them. Benjamin found me there as morning light filtered through Eleanor's windows, still reviewing files that documented 13 years of systematic crime. "Agent Park is waiting for your authorization," he said quietly. "The federal case is complete. 6 arrest warrants are prepared, but the operation depends on moving immediately." I looked at Eleanor's computer screen, still displaying evidence that would destroy the Caldwell network and everyone connected to it. "The children they have now," I asked. "How long before the Caldwells disappear?" "They're planning to leave Portland tomorrow night. If we don't execute the warrants within 24 hours, they'll vanish into their network, and the 6 teenagers they've placed will disappear with them." The decision was simple. Eleanor had spent 13 years preparing me for this moment. I'd spent 13 years unknowingly training to fight this battle. The only question was whether I was ready to stop being their victim and start being their judgment. Benjamin's call to the Caldwell's attorney was brief and devastating in its precision. James Goldstein of Goldstein and Partners had built his reputation on aggressive probate litigation, but nothing in his experience had prepared him for what Benjamin Crawford was about to reveal. "Mr. Goldstein, we have comprehensive video and audio evidence of your clients discussing child trafficking activities spanning 13 years. This includes financial records, witness statements, and federal law enforcement consultation. Your clients have 24 hours to withdraw their will contest or face immediate federal prosecution under the Trafficking Victims Protection Act." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly 30 seconds before Goldstein found his voice. "That's an extremely serious accusation, Crawford. We'll need to examine this supposed evidence immediately." "FBI Portland Field Office, 9109 NE, Cascades Parkway, Conference Room B, 1 hour. Bring your clients. Agent Lisa Park from the Human Trafficking Unit will be present to answer questions about federal prosecution procedures." The meeting was surreal in its politeness and devastating in its implications. Jonathan and Patricia sat across from Benjamin, myself, and Agent Park in a sterile federal conference room, their faces cycling between defiance, disbelief, and growing terror as Benjamin methodically played selected recordings. He didn't use the most damaging evidence, just enough to demonstrate the scope and quality of what Eleanor had collected. Jonathan's voice from 2011, "Mary's just the beginning. These people pay premium for clean kids." Patricia from 2018, "Client satisfaction is everything in this business." Their most recent discussion, "6 more initially, premium rate this time, 22,000 each." Agent Park took careful notes while reviewing financial documents spread across the conference table. Goldstein grew progressively paler as he realized the implications of what his clients had apparently been discussing in detail while being unknowingly recorded. When the audio presentation concluded, the silence in the federal conference room was profound and oppressive. Patricia stared at the table surface as if it might offer some escape from what she'd just heard. Jonathan seemed to age 10 years in the span of 10 minutes. "This is entrapment," Patricia finally whispered, her voice barely audible. "Single-party consent state," Agent Park replied with professional calm. Mrs. Whitfield had every legal right to record conversations in her own home. What's more immediately concerning is the ongoing federal investigation into Youth Services Consulting, LLC, and the 17 client families we've identified across 3 states. Agent Park consulted her own notes with obvious preparation for this moment. "We have financial records, surveillance footage, and witness statements from multiple victims spanning more than a decade. 6 teenagers are currently in questionable placements that require immediate federal intervention." James Goldstein closed his briefcase with hands that weren't entirely steady. I'm withdrawing from this case immediately. My clients will need separate representation for these new allegations. The FBI operation unfolded with the efficiency of something that had been planned for months rather than days. Within 48 hours, simultaneous search warrants were executed on the Caldwell's home, their business office, the Youth Services Consulting headquarters, and 6 client family residences across Oregon and Washington. Local news covered the story with the breathless intensity of a major scandal breaking in real time. Portland couple charged in multi-state child trafficking network. The television reports were carefully edited to protect victim identities, but enough details emerged to destroy any remaining sympathy for Jonathan and Patricia's inheritance claims. FBI case number PDX-2024-0156 became the largest human trafficking investigation in Oregon history, with 12 primary defendants and 6 federal counts, ranging from conspiracy to transport minors across state lines to racketeering charges that carried potential life sentences. The irony wasn't lost on anyone who'd followed the will contest story. For 3 weeks, Jonathan and Patricia had systematically destroyed my reputation as a manipulative opportunist who preyed on vulnerable elderly women. Now the entire city could see exactly who the real predators were and what they'd been doing to vulnerable children. The phone calls I received were a complete reversal of the character assassination campaign they'd orchestrated. Mrs. Henderson called to apologize. "Mary, dear, I'm so sorry about everything we believed. The whole neighborhood feels sick about what they were really doing. How could we have been so blind?" Dr. Martinez from OHSU called to offer my position back with a formal apology from hospital administration. "We should have investigated the sources of those allegations more carefully. Your expertise in identifying abuse cases makes perfect sense now." I was gracious in accepting these apologies, but I didn't forget who had believed the Caldwell's lies so readily and who had demanded evidence before condemning me. Jonathan and Patricia made one desperate final attempt to reach me before their arrest, somehow bypassing hospital security to corner me near the pediatric nurses' station during my first shift back at OHSU. Their appearance in Children's Ward 3B was both pathetic and enraging. 2 people who'd sold children attempting to confront me, surrounded by the children I'd devoted my career to protecting. "You've destroyed everything we worked for," Patricia hissed, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking completely after years of performance. "We gave you a home, a family, opportunities you never would have had otherwise. We saved you from the system." Jonathan's face was mottled with rage and desperation, his voice carrying through the pediatric ward despite his attempt to speak quietly. "We made you who you are. Without us, you'd be nothing. Another foster kid who aged out with no prospects, no education, no future. You owe us everything you've achieved." They were creating a public scene in a children's hospital, threatening a nurse in front of patients, families, and medical staff. Security cameras captured every word of their performance, which would be submitted as additional evidence of their character and judgment. I looked at these people who'd called themselves my parents for 13 years, who'd sold me like livestock, and then demanded gratitude for the privilege. For the first time in my adult life, I felt no fear of their anger or manipulation. "You're absolutely right," I said quietly, my voice carrying clearly through their hysteria. "You did make me who I am today. You taught me that some people will sell children for money. You showed me exactly what evil looks like when it pretends to be loving family. And you gave me a lifetime motivation to spend my career protecting children from people exactly like you." Security guards arrived within minutes, alerted by nursing staff who'd recognized the disruption. As they escorted Jonathan and Patricia from the building, I heard Patricia screaming about betrayal, ingratitude, and how I was destroying innocent people who'd only tried to help me. OHSU Security Incident Report number 2024-1129 documented their final performance comprehensively. Every word would be transcribed and submitted as evidence in their federal trial. The arrest came at Portland International Airport 18 hours later. Jonathan and Patricia were attempting to board separate red-eye flights to Miami and Los Angeles, with one-way tickets purchased under names that didn't match their identification. FBI agents found $127,000 in cash, distributed between their luggage, falsified identity documents, and contact information for what appeared to be overseas placement networks. They weren't just fleeing federal prosecution, they were attempting to rebuild their operation internationally, using the same methods that had worked in the United States for more than a decade. The federal courthouse at 1000 SW 3rd Avenue became familiar territory over the following months as the trafficking case developed into a comprehensive investigation of placement networks operating across 6 states. Room 15 hosted testimony from 17 survivors, 43 witnesses, and dozens of federal agents who'd been tracking similar operations. My own testimony became a centerpiece of the prosecution's case, but the most powerful moment came when Detective Rebecca Stone presented her 13 years of surveillance evidence and Eleanor's systematic documentation of criminal activity. But the most unexpected development occurred during my final day of testimony, when a woman in the gallery requested permission to address the court. Your Honor, I'm Dr. Sarah Mitchell from Oregon Neurology Associates. I evaluated Eleanor Whitfield 3 weeks before her death. I have additional information about Mrs. Whitfield's mental capacity and her understanding of the evidence she was collecting. Dr. Mitchell's revelation would add another layer to Eleanor's remarkable preparation and planning, and it would explain why she'd been so confident about the ultimate outcome of her 13-year investigation. Eleanor's Foundation for Exploited Children officially opened 8 months after the federal trial concluded, headquartered in the completely renovated Victorian mansion at 3247 Northwest Hoyt Street. The initial funding of $5 million from Eleanor's inheritance was just the foundation for something much larger. When the tech community learned about Eleanor's background and the case that had exposed the trafficking network, contributions poured in from companies across the Pacific Northwest. Apple, which had purchased Eleanor's Safeguard Technologies in 2019, contributed $3 million. Microsoft added $2 million. Smaller tech companies inspired by Eleanor's story and the Foundation's mission contributed another $3 million in the first year alone. The 501c3 approval came through with unusual speed thanks to Benjamin's legal expertise and the high-profile nature of our case. Our mission statement was precisely crafted: identify trafficking networks operating through legitimate placement services, provide comprehensive resources for survivors, and train professionals to recognize signs of exploitation before children are victimized. My nursing background became the Foundation's core operational strength. Medical professionals are often the first and sometimes only point of contact for trafficked children, but most lack specific training to recognize the subtle indicators of systematic abuse and exploitation. Our professional training program reached 156 hospitals across Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and Northern California in the first year. The curriculum I developed covered everything Eleanor's investigation had taught me: financial irregularities in family placement arrangements, behavioral patterns in exploited children, documentation inconsistencies that suggest trafficking, and legal procedures for reporting suspected cases to federal authorities. But the work that provided the most personal satisfaction was direct intervention. Our first major case involved 23 children rescued from a network operating through private educational consultants in Seattle. Our second case exposed a placement service in Sacramento that had been moving teenagers across state lines for 5 years. The registered letter from Benjamin arrived on the first anniversary of Eleanor's death, containing keys to a safe deposit box at U.S. Bank downtown that I hadn't known existed. The accompanying note explained that Eleanor had prepared one final revelation for this specific date. Your aunt wanted you to have this information when you were emotionally ready to understand the complete scope of what she'd been fighting for, Benjamin explained as we opened the deposit box together. Inside were documents that revealed Eleanor's true motivation and the real source of her fortune. Safeguard Technologies hadn't been a general software company. It was specifically designed to create online protection systems for children at risk of exploitation by predators and traffickers. Eleanor had founded the company in 2012, 1 year after learning about my situation through Detective Stone's initial investigation. Every algorithm, every security protocol, every protective feature had been developed with one purpose: preventing other children from experiencing what had happened to me. The sale to Apple for $127 million in 2019 had occurred because Apple committed to integrating Eleanor's child protection technology into their mobile operating systems. Every iPhone now carries software Eleanor created specifically to keep vulnerable children safe from predators who use technology to identify and groom potential victims. She started Safeguard after learning the details of your trafficking situation, Benjamin explained. Everything she built professionally was inspired by her determination to prevent other children from being victimized the same way. The perfect symmetry was overwhelming. Eleanor had used money earned protecting children to gather evidence against the people who'd exploited me, then left me that money to continue her mission on an even larger scale. Detective Stone's final comprehensive report, delivered on the day Jonathan and Patricia were sentenced to 25 years in federal prison, revealed the last element of Eleanor's masterpiece of preparation and justice. Eleanor hired me not just to document the Caldwell's current activities, Detective Stone explained, but to locate and contact every child who'd been processed through their network between 2011 and 2024. The investigation had identified 17 survivors, 12 of whom were now adults living across 6 states. All had experienced varying degrees of exploitation. All had been told they were fortunate to be chosen, grateful for opportunities provided by generous families, indebted to people who'd rescued them from worse alternatives. None had understood they'd been systematically trafficked until Eleanor's investigation reached them and provided context for their experiences. The Foundation's second major program became survivor outreach, support, and advocacy. These weren't just victims requiring assistance. They were witnesses whose testimonies would help prosecute the broader network and prevent future operations. But the most personally meaningful discovery was a folder labeled Mary's Complete Family History. Inside were photographs, documents, and records about my biological parents, Catherine and Michael Morrison, and their legacy that had been stolen along with my identity. My real parents had been elementary school teachers who'd established scholarship funds for disadvantaged children. The inheritance they'd left me had been substantial enough to motivate distant relatives to purchase access to me through the Morrison family. Eleanor had spent 13 years not just protecting me, but researching my true identity and preserving my biological family's memory. I was continuing a mission that had started with my birth parents' commitment to helping vulnerable children, been interrupted by my sale and trafficking, and resumed through Eleanor's determination to see justice accomplished. Standing in Eleanor's former study, now converted into the Foundation's research center, I finally understood her final recording. You're not their victim anymore. You're their judgment. I wasn't just a nurse who'd inherited money. I was a survivor who'd become a protector, carrying forward a legacy that connected my biological parents' dreams to Eleanor's vision to my own calling as someone who would spend her life ensuring that no other child would be bought and sold like property.